For 6 years, an old man set 2 places at his small table every single evening. He would cook a simple dinner, a little rice, a little fish, some greens he grew himself in clay pots out in the hallway, and then he would lay down 2 bowls, 2 pairs of chopsticks, 2 cups. And then he would sit, and he would eat his half, and the second place would stay clean and untouched and waiting exactly the way it had waited the night before, and the night before that. The chair beside his own was for his son. And for 6 years the son did not come. For 6 years. Every gift the old man shaped with his own patient hands and sent off to the city came back to him stamped with 4 cold words. Return to sender, no recipient. And the old man carried each one back up the stairs and hid it away in the dark beneath his bed, and told the neighbors with a soft and shining smile that his boy had loved it. This is the story of that empty chair, and the son it was waiting for, and the gray afternoon the son finally came home. It is a quiet story, my friends, and I promise you it does not end the way you think. Before I begin, let me ask you to do one small and gentle thing for me. Tell me down in the comments the name of the place you are listening from tonight, because it warms this old heart of mine to know how far these stories travel. And if there is someone in your own life who has grown old waiting to hear from you, a parent, a grandparent, anyone who used to be your whole world before the world got so very big, I want you to simply hold them in your mind for a moment, as you listen. You do not have to do anything yet. Just hold them there and stay with me all the way to the end. Now let me tell you the story. But first, come and stand with me a moment in my kitchen, because the evening meal is on the fire, and there is something the cooking has been teaching me for 60 years that I want to share with you. I have a pot of rice and a little pot of soup going on the coals right now, and if you have ever cooked over a fire, you know the first and most important truth of it, the one every grandmother knows in her bones. You cannot put a pot on the fire and then walk away and expect to come back later and find it warm and whole and waiting for you. It does not work that way. A pot must be tended. You have to feed the fire and turn the pot and lift the lid and stir and watch it and be there with it again and again through the whole of the cooking. Leave it too long, and the fire dies down and the food goes cold and hard in the bottom of the pot. Leave it a different way, and the fire climbs too high and the rice scorches and sticks and burns, and the whole house fills with the bitter smell of a thing that was left alone too long. The only way to keep a pot good is to show up for it. Not once. Not when you happen to have time. Every single day, the whole time it is on the fire. And there is a second thing my cooking has taught me, a softer thing. Every evening of my life I have cooked a little more than I needed for myself, and I have kept a bowl warm under a clean cloth at the edge of the hearth set aside just in case. In case a child stops by. In case a neighbor is hungry. In case someone I love walks through my door at the end of a long day with nowhere else to go. That warm bowl under the cloth, my friends, that is what love looks like when you can see it. It is keeping a place. It is keeping the rice warm. It is leaving a small light burning in the window, so that anyone who is cold and lost and far from home knows that somewhere, someone has saved them a seat at the table. And then this morning out in my garden before the heat came up, I did the third thing, the thing that finishes the lesson. I planted a young fruit tree, down by the back fence, the slow kind, the kind that takes many long years before it bears. And I am an old woman, my friends. I know with no sadness at all, that I may never sit in the shade of that tree, and I may never taste a single one of its fruits. I planted it anyway. Because that too is what love does. Love plants trees whose shade it will never sit in, and saves seed for harvests it may never live to gather, and shapes beautiful things for children who have not yet even been born. Love tends the pot every day. Love keeps the bowl warm under the cloth. And love plants for those who come after, asking nothing back. I thought about all of that tonight, stirring my soup and watching the light go down, because the story I want to tell you is about a man who understood every one of those things in his very bones. He kept a pot on the fire and a bowl warm and a chair saved for 6 long years, for a son who did not come. And in the dark beneath his bed, he was keeping something he had planted for a child who was not yet born. So let me tell you about the old carpenter, and the empty chair, and the love that waited in the dark to be opened. His name was Emile, and he lived 3 doors down from a man named Walter, who is the one who first told me this story. In the same crumbling old block of flats where the paint peels in the stairwell, and everyone knows everyone's business whether they want to or not. Walter had watched a great many things over the years in that building, ordinary things, the small dramas and kindnesses of poor people living close together. But the thing that stayed with Walter, the thing he said he had needed to tell to someone for a long time, was the empty chair by Emil's window, and the boy it was waiting for, and the day that boy finally came home. To understand the waiting, you first have to understand who Emil was. He was a master joiner. A real one, the old kind, retired now but still with the hands for it, big, careful, patient hands. With one thumbnail he had struck with a hammer 40 years before that had never quite grown back right. He had spent his whole working life making things out of wood. Doors and tables and cabinets and window frames for half the families in that part of the city. And he had a thing he used to say whenever he was teaching some younger man how to do it properly. "You do not force the wood," he would say. "You listen to it. You work with the grain it already has, not the grain you wish it had. And if you craft a joint right, a true mortise and tenon, you do not even need a single nail. It holds because the two pieces have been shaped, patiently, to embrace each other." He believed that about wood. And Walter came to understand much later that he believed it about people too. About his son most of all. Emil thought that if he just kept his own side of the joint true, kept his own shape, stayed patient, then one day the two of them would fit back together the way they were always meant to. No nails. No forcing. Just two pieces shaped to hold each other, waiting. Daniel was his only child. Emil's wife, a gentle woman named Margot, had passed away a long time before, when the boy was still small, and Emil had raised his son alone, in that same one-room flat, with those same careful hands. He made the boy a wooden bed. He made him a little stool to stand on so he could reach the sink. When Daniel was learning to walk, Emil built a low railing along one wall, so the boy would always have something steady to hold. The whole flat was full of Emil's love for his son, built right into the furniture, right into the walls themselves. There was not a corner of that little room that did not hold the shape of a father's hands. And Daniel grew up good and bright and hungry for more than that old building could ever give him, the way children are supposed to grow, and Emil was proud of it. He wanted the boy to fly. He used to tell the other men, down in the alley by the tea stall, "My Daniel is going to carve out a great big life, not like his old father. High up in the city among important people." He said it with pride. He meant it with pride. He had no idea, I think, kind and hopeful man that he was, that flying away and never landing again were two entirely different things, and that his boy would learn only the first one. Let me tell you a little more about those early years, because you cannot understand the size of the empty chair unless you first understand how full the room once was. When Margot died, Daniel was only 4 years old, far too small to truly hold the memory of his mother, and Emil in his grief made a quiet and total decision. He would be everything. He would be the father and the mother both, the strong hand and the soft one, and he would build his whole life around that small boy the way he built a cabinet around the thing it was meant to hold. He turned down work that would have taken him away. He learned to braid hair, clumsily, and to cook the soft foods a child likes, and to sing the foolish little songs at bedtime that his big rough carpenter's voice was never meant for. And he sang them anyway, every night, badly and tenderly, until the boy slept. The whole of that one-room flat became a love letter written in wood. The little stool, so the boy could reach the sink to brush his teeth. The low railing along the wall, so that when Daniel was learning to walk, he would always have something steady and smooth to hold. A small wooden horse on wheels that the boy dragged everywhere by a string until the paint wore off its nose. A tiny desk, sized exactly to a 6-year-old, where Daniel did his first letters with his tongue poking out in concentration while his father worked across the room. Walter said that the most particular sound of those years, the sound that meant home in that building, was the soft, steady whisper of Emil's hand plane sliding along a length of wood, late into the evening while the boy slept. That sound was a father shaping something, always shaping something for the child he loved. And Daniel loved him back fiercely, the way small boys love a father who is their entire world. Walter remembered the two of them walking down to the tea stall hand in hand on Sunday mornings, the big scarred hand and the small soft one, and how the boy used to stand on the bottom rung of his father's workbench to watch him work, and how Emil would let him hold the wood steady, telling him gravely that he could not have done it without his help, even when the boy's small hands were doing nothing at all. He taught the boy the names of the woods, the way other fathers teach the names of stars. This one is oak, sun, strong and slow. This one is pine, soft and quick and forgiving. And this dark one here, this is walnut, the most beautiful of all, but you have to be patient with it, you cannot rush it or it splits. Daniel could name every wood in the shop before he could read. He used to fall asleep, Walter said, with wood shavings caught in his hair like curls of gold, lulled by the sound of his father making the world a little more beautiful, one careful joint at a time. There was one afternoon Walter told me about that I have not been able to stop thinking of. Daniel, perhaps 8 years old, had come home from school crying, because some other boys had teased him for having no mother, and for living in the old building, and for his father being only a man who worked with his hands. And Emile had not raged, and he had not given the boy easy comfort. He had set the child down on the workbench at eye level, and he had picked up a rough, ugly, splintered block of scrap wood, a piece anyone else would have thrown on the fire. And he had said, "Watch." And over the next hour, with the boy's tears slowly drying, Emile had planed and shaped and sanded that ugly scrap, patiently, lovingly, until it became a small, smooth, perfect bird, a bird that seemed almost about to fly. And he had placed it in his son's hands and said, "Every single thing in this world, Daniel, even the ugliest, even the most thrown away, has something beautiful hidden inside it, waiting for someone patient enough to bring it out. Do not let anyone tell you what a thing is worth by looking at the outside of it. Not a piece of wood. Not a building. Not a man who works with his hands. And not you. Especially not you." Daniel kept that little wooden bird his whole life. He had it still, up in the city, on a high shelf in his important flat, gathering dust through all the busy drowning years, a small forgotten thing from a father he had set down in a corner and told himself he would come back for next week. That was the room, my friends, before it grew so empty. That was how full it had been. A whole childhood of a father's love, built right into the furniture, sung badly at bedtime, planed into the shape of a little wooden bird. You must hold all of that in your mind now, as I tell you the rest, because the chair that sat empty for 6 years was not empty because the love had been small. It was empty because the love had been so very large, and had been carried so far away, and had been for a while so completely forgotten. Daniel did go to the city. The great concrete jungle, the one with the towers and the flashing lights, a few hours away by bus. He got himself an education and then a job and then a better job. He met a young woman named Helene and he married her. And the visits home, which in the beginning had been every single month, slowly became every few months and then twice a year and then once a year and then, well, you already know how it goes, my friends. You have very likely watched it happen in your own family from one side of it or the other. The calls get shorter. The "I will come next month" turns into "I will come when work calms down," and work never calms down up there, not for anyone, not ever. The distance grows so slowly, so gently, that no one can ever point to the single day it became too far. It is not like a door slamming. It is like a tide going out, so quietly that you do not notice the water is gone until you look up one afternoon and find nothing but dry sand stretching all the way to the horizon. Walter remembered the last visit that still felt like the old days, though none of them knew at the time that it would be the last of its kind. Daniel came down on a bright spring afternoon, before the worst of the city's weight had settled onto his shoulders, and he sat at the tea stall with the old men, and he let his father show him off, the way a proud father does. "This is my Daniel," Emile kept saying, to people who had known the boy since he was small and needed no introduction at all. "Look how well he has done." And Daniel had laughed and bought tea for everyone, and played a few moves of the endless chess game, and for one warm afternoon the joint had fit back together as though it had never come apart. When the boy left that evening, Emile stood at the gate and watched the bus until it was out of sight, and then he turned to Walter with his whole face shining, and he said, "He is going to come more often now, you watch. He told me so." And Walter had smiled and agreed, because that is what you do. But there was something in the way the boy had checked his phone 3 times during the visit. Something in the way his mind had kept drifting up toward the city even while his body sat among them. That made Walter's heart sink a little, though he could not have said why. And the visits did not come more often. They came less. The next spring, Daniel did not come at all, and sent word that work was impossible. The autumn after that, he meant to come for the harvest festival, and a deal fell through at the last moment and he could not. And Emil each time would gather up the disappointment and fold it away neatly and produce one of his gentle excuses, polished and ready. There was one birthday in particular that Walter could not forget. Emil's birthday. The old man had mentioned shyly for a week beforehand that he thought Daniel might call this year, might even come. He cleaned the flat. He bought a little extra at the market, a nicer fish than usual in case. He set the table that evening with particular care, and he sat down in his chair and he waited. And the telephone did not ring. Walter, who had come by to wish his friend a happy birthday, sat with him through that long quiet evening, and watched the old man glance toward the silent telephone every few minutes, and watched him keep finding reasons it was all right. The lines are probably busy, with everyone calling for the holiday. He will call tomorrow when the rates are cheaper. I told him to wait for the cheaper rates. He is so thoughtful that way. And at the end of the evening, Emil had cut his nicer fish in half as always and eaten his portion slowly, and left the other half on the second plate untouched, and then he had wrapped it up carefully to eat himself the next day, because you do not waste good fish and because the boy might still come. He never mentioned the next morning or ever that his son had forgotten his birthday. He simply absorbed it the way the good earth absorbs the rain and went on. That was the year Walter said that he understood the drift had become something else. It had become a permanent weather. The boy was not coming back next month or next season. The tide had gone all the way out. Until one year for Emil the drift was simply absolute. The boy was gone in every way that a living son can be gone. And here, my friends, is the thing I need you to hear because it is the very thing that makes this story ache the way it does. In all those years, Emil never once got angry about it. Not one single time. In 6 long years, the neighbors never heard that man say one hard word about his son. When Daniel did not call on his birthday, Emil would only shake his head fondly and say, "Ah, he is so busy, that boy. You cannot imagine the pressure they put on a man in that city." When Daniel did not come for the new year, Emil would say, "The buses are terrible this time of year. I told him myself not to risk the journey." He collected excuses for his son the way other men collect grievances. He built each one carefully, lovingly, the way he built everything. And he believed in them, or he made himself believe in them, because the only other thing to believe, the thought that his boy simply was not thinking of him at all, was a thing Emil could not allow through the door of that little room. It would not fit there. There was no room in his heart for it. So he kept the excuses instead, polished and ready. And he kept the empty chair, and he kept tending the fire and keeping the bowl warm, and he kept on hoping every single evening that tonight might be the night the second place at the table was finally filled. Now, I do not want you to imagine that Emil's life was nothing but that sadness, because it was not, and I think the old man himself would be hurt if I told it to you that way. He had the building. He had his people. You see, down at the foot of that crumbling old block of flats just inside the gate there was a little tea stall. Only a low table and a few wobbly plastic stools and an old woman who had been selling tea and small sweets there for longer than anyone could quite remember. And every morning, and most afternoons too, that little stall was where the old men of the neighborhood gathered. There was Walter, of course. There was the fellow who fixed motorbikes in the alley, who always had grease worked deep under his fingernails no matter how he scrubbed. There was the barber, retired now but still trimming the thin hair of his old friends for the price of a cup of tea. And there was Emil. They would sit together on those rickety stools, and drink tea that was always brewed too strong, and put the world to rights and play chess. Emil and Walter had a game of chess going between them that, I am not exaggerating, lasted the better part of 2 whole years. Because neither of them would ever simply finish it. They would play 3 moves and then fall to arguing about something else entirely. The price of bread or the state of the roof or some piece of news from the radio. And they would leave the board sitting right there on the little table, half played. And the tea stall woman would lay a clean cloth over it to keep the dust off and guard it faithfully until the 2 of them wandered back the next day to play another 3 moves. That unfinished game sat between those 2 old friends like a promise. Like a quiet agreement that there would always be a tomorrow, Always another afternoon. Always more time. It is a tender thing, my friends, an unfinished game between two old men who are in no hurry at all to reach the end of anything. I will ask you to remember that chessboard. It matters for the end of this story, because that was the true texture of Emil's life, the real weave of it. He was somebody in that building. He had a place and a name and 100 small threads tying him to the people all around him. When the barber's roof began to leak, it was Emil who climbed up there with his old tools and mended the frame, slow on his bad knees but sure with his hands. When a young couple on the second floor had their first baby and could not afford a proper crib, it was Emil who built them one. Of course it was beautiful and sturdy and free, because that was simply who he was. The tea stall woman kept his hallway plants watered for him on the days when his knees were too bad to bend to them. The motorbike man drove him to the clinic whenever he needed to go, and never once asked for a thing in return. They knew his name. They knew his hands. They knew his whole heart, even the tender, aching part of it that he tried so hard to keep hidden. In that crumbling old building, with its peeling paint and its bad plumbing and its endless small troubles, Emil was held up every single day by 100 quiet threads of people who knew exactly who he was and loved him for it. He was not a lonely man, whatever the empty chair might have told you. He was, in the ways that the world does not measure but that matter most of all, a rich one. Please hold on to that too. It matters more than you can know for where this story is going. Let me tell you just a few of the small ways that old man was woven into the life of that building, because they matter for the end, and because I do not want you to picture him as lonely. There was a young couple on the second floor, newly married, expecting their first child, and they could not afford a crib, and they were ashamed to say so. Emil heard of it, the way he heard of everything, and he did not embarrass them by offering. He simply showed up one evening at their door with a crib he had built, a good one, sturdy and smooth, and he said, only I had some wood left over, it would be a shame to waste it, you would be doing me a favor to take it off my hands. And the young mother wept, and Emil waved it away and went back up the stairs before she could thank him properly, because he did not do it to be thanked. He did it because that was simply who he was. That baby slept in Emil's crib. Half the children in that building over the years had slept in cribs that Emil built, or sat at tables he made, or learned to walk along railings he had fixed to the walls. He had built the very bones of their daily lives quietly for decades. When the barber's roof leaked one bad winter, and the landlord would not come, it was Emil, well past 70 by then, who climbed up there with his old tools and patched the frame, slow and careful on his bad knees, refusing all help, refusing all payment, accepting in the end only a cup of tea and a haircut he did not need. When the tea stall woman's husband died, it was Emil who built the simple wooden box they laid him in, and would not take a coin for it, and sat with her through the long first night so she would not be alone. When a child on the 4th floor was frightened of the dark, it was Emil who carved her a little wooden nightlight holder shaped like a sleeping cat. They came to him with everything, that whole building. A sticking door, a wobbling table, a broken toy, a heart that needed mending as much as the furniture did. And Emil gave to all of them freely with those big careful hands, for 30 years and asked nothing back. He was not a wealthy man. He never had 2 coins to rub together. But he was, in the truest sense there is, the richest man in that building, because there was not one single soul under that roof who did not owe some small warmth of their daily life to the work of his hands. That is what it means to belong somewhere. That is what it means to be needed. And that, my friends, is the thing you must understand about Emil before you can understand the choice he made at the very end, the choice that surprised everyone, the choice that is the whole quiet heart of this story. So you must picture him now, this Emil, in the full and proper truth of him. Not a pitiful old man alone in the dark, but a beloved old craftsman at the warm center of a whole small world, who happened to carry, inside that warm full life, one single empty place that no one but his own son could ever fill. He would spend his afternoons at the tea stall among his friends, laughing, arguing over the chessboard, fixing what was broken, and then in the evening he would climb the stairs back up to his one-room flat, and he would light his little fire, and he would cook his simple dinner, and he would set down 2 bowls. And the first bowl he would eat from slowly, and the second he would leave clean and waiting, and he would look at it across the little wooden table, that empty place by the window, And in the whole of his full and beloved life, that quiet half-hour each evening was the only time the loneliness was allowed to come and sit with him. He let it sit. He did not chase it away. Because that empty chair, my friends, was not really emptiness at all. It was the exact shape of how much he loved his son. It was hope given a place at the table. And a man does not chase away his own hope, however much it costs him to keep feeding it. Because there was another part to Emil's waiting, and it is the part that breaks the heart clean in two. Every single year, Emil made his son something with his own 2 hands. He did not have money to send. He had only what he had always had, which was time and skill, and a love that had nowhere else to go. And so he poured all 3 of those things into gifts, one after another, year after year. It began after Daniel got married. Emil heard, through a distant cousin who still spoke to the boy now and then, that there might one day be a grandchild. Nothing certain, just a possibility mentioned in passing. And that was all the old man needed. Emil, who had nothing but time and skill and love, began to build a cradle. A wooden cradle for a grandchild who had not yet been born, for a grandchild he had never actually been told was coming, and had simply quietly decided to hope for. He worked on that cradle for months. Walter would come by and find him sanding the rockers smooth, running his thumb along them again and again and again, feeling for any rough place that might one day catch a baby's soft blanket. He carved small things into the headboard, little birds in flight, and a gentle crescent moon. He did not rush a single moment of it. You do not force the wood. And when it was finally finished, it was the most beautiful thing Walter had ever seen come out of that man's hands, and Walter had seen a great many of them over the years. Emil wrapped it up with the greatest care, and he carried it down to the post office, and he sent it off to his son in the city, with a note that said, Walter was told only 4 words. For when the little one comes. With love, your father. That was the first gift. But it was very far from the last. When Emil heard on the radio that the city where Daniel lived was suffering through a cold spell, a real one, the kind of cold that gets down into old bones and young lungs alike, he would worry. And worrying for Emil never meant wringing his hands. Worrying for Emil meant doing. So he would make jars of honeyed lemon, the old remedy, the very kind his own mother had made for him when he was a boy, slicing the lemons thin and layering them patiently with honey, letting them steep for weeks until they dissolved together into a thick golden syrup, good for a cough, good for a sore and aching throat. He would make a jar for Daniel and a jar for Helene, and later, when he let himself hope hard enough, a small one for the little one when she is old enough. And he would carry those heavy glass jars down to the post office, his arms trembling a little with the weight of them, and send them off into the cold of the faraway city. Because his boy was up there somewhere in that cold, and a father does what a father can. And there were others still, because once Emil started, the love simply kept overflowing into whatever his hands could shape. One year he carved a chess set, beautiful little figures, a whole army of them, thinking perhaps that if he sent it, his son might one day teach a grandchild to play, the way Emil and Walter played at the tea stall. Another year he made a small wooden music box, with a tiny carved bird on the top that turned slowly when it played. And once, with particular care, he carved a nameplate for the door of his son's new flat in the city, Daniel's family name in clean and graceful letters, so that the boy would have a piece of his father's hands on the threshold of his new and important life. Each one took weeks. Each one was made with the whole of the old man's heart. And each one he wrapped, and carried down to the post office on his slow and aching legs, and sent off to the city with love, your father. And now, my friends, I have to tell you the thing that Walter himself did not learn for the longest time. The thing that was quietly happening in that little flat while the rest of the building went about its small and ordinary days. The gifts were coming back. Not all at once. The first one Walter did not even know about. But that cradle, that beautiful cradle Emil had sanded smooth for all those months, it came back. Returned to sender. Because Daniel and his wife had moved, you see, chasing a grander life, a bigger flat in a better part of the city, and they had left Emil's old address behind them like an outgrown coat. So the cradle traveled all those long, lonely miles to the city, and it knocked at a door that was guarded now by strangers who only shook their heads, And so it turned around and journeyed all those desolate miles back again, to the little post office at the foot of the hill, bearing a stark yellow sticker. Return to sender. No recipient. That was all it said. No recipient. As though the boy had simply ceased to exist, at the only address in all the world his father knew to reach him. And the honeyed lemon jars, some of those came back too. A new address or no answer when the postman rang the bell, or a buzzer pressed and pressed in the empty lobby of some tall building where nobody ever came down. Returned. No recipient. Heavy glass jars full of an old man's worry and an old woman's recipe, carried all the way to the great city and all the way home again, never once opened. The chess set came back. The little music box came back, its carved bird still and silent in the dark of the package. Even the nameplate, the one with the family name carved so carefully into the wood, came back because by the time it arrived, the family had moved on once more, and there was no longer any door in the city that would admit the name of Émile's only son. And I want to tell you what Émile did with them. Because this, Walter said, is the part he still thinks about at night, even now. He did not cry as far as anyone ever saw. He did not rage at the post office, or telephone his son to demand to know why the address was always wrong, or do any of the 1,000 things a man would have every right in the world to do. What Émile did was this. He carried each returned gift quietly back up the stairs to his little flat, and he got down slow on his bad knees, and he slid them one by one into the dark beneath his bed. The cradle and the jars, and the chess set and the music box and the nameplate and whatever else had come back to him over the long years. He laid them all there in the dark beneath the frame he had built with his own hands, and he draped a clean cloth over them, so that no eye would ever see. And then he stood up, and he went on setting 2 places at the table. He went on collecting his gentle excuses. He went on tending the fire and keeping the bowl warm and hoping. And he lied to Walter. Walter would come by, and he had seen the cradle leave all those months ago, so he would ask gently, the way you ask a thing you are afraid of the answer to. Did Daniel like it, Émile? Did the little one come yet? And Émile would look up at his old friend, and his whole soft tired face would light, and he would say, oh, he loved it. He telephoned me, you know. Said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Said the 2 of them wept when they opened it. He is just so busy, you understand how it is up there. He has not had the chance yet to send a photograph. And about the jars, Émile would say, he told me it was just exactly like his grandmother used to make. Said it carried him right through the whole cold spell. Good boy. Busy boy. And Walter knew. God help him, Walter said, I saw straight through every word of it. He had watched the parcels come back. The whole building had, eventually, because you cannot keep a thing like that secret in a place like that. Walter knew that under that bed, beneath that quiet cloth, lay every single token his son had never received, and that Émile was telling him a story the old man needed to be true far more than he needed Walter to believe it. So Walter did the only thing he could think to do. The only truly kind thing. He believed him. Out loud, I mean. He would say of course he loved it, Émile. How on earth could he not? You have got the best hands in this whole city. And he let the old man keep his story, because that story, Walter understood, was the very last place on earth where Émile still got to be Daniel's father, and Walter was not going to be the man who took that away from him. Some lies, my friends, you leave well alone. Some lies are simply a person holding on to their own dignity with both hands, and the cruelest thing you could ever do is to pry those fingers loose. So Walter let him keep it, and the 2 of them went on drinking their too strong tea, and playing their endless unfinished game of chess, and the empty chair went on waiting by the window, and the dark beneath the bed went on filling, quietly, year by year, with all the love that had been carried to the city and sent home again, unopened. There was a young woman who worked behind the counter at the little post office at the foot of the hill, and over the years she came to know Émile better than almost anyone outside his own building. He came so often, you see, always with something heavy and carefully wrapped, always with that same soft hopeful look. She knew the shape of the cradle box when he carried it in, and the clink of the honeyed lemon jars, and the particular care he took filling out the address, checking it twice, his big hands moving slowly over the small form. She did not know the whole story in the beginning. She only knew that there was an old man who came in every few months to send his love to the city, and that there was something in his face when he handed over a parcel that made her want to be gentle with him. And then came the day she had to do the hardest thing her job ever asked of her. The cradle came back. She was the one on duty when it arrived. The great box she remembered him sending months before, now travel-worn and battered, with that stark yellow sticker slapped across the careful address in his own hand. Returned to sender. No recipient. And she had to stand there behind her counter and watch the old man come in, smiling, expecting perhaps to send another jar. And she had to slide the returned box across to him and watch his face as he understood. She told Walter years later that she never forgot it. That the old man did not crumble, and did not weep, and did not say a hard word. He simply went very still for a moment, looking down at the box, at his own handwriting, at the cold yellow sticker. And then he said quietly, they must have moved. He has done so well for himself, you see, he is always moving up. I will find the new address. And he gathered the heavy box up into his arms, the cradle he had sanded smooth for months, and he carried it back out and up the hill and home. And the young clerk said she had to go into the back room and sit down for a while, because she had never seen anything in her life so quietly heartbreaking as an old man picking up his own returned love and carrying it home, still making excuses for the child who had not been there to receive it. But here is the thing, my friends, the thing that I think is the true and beating heart of why this is not, in the end, only a sad story. Emile kept coming. Even after the returns began, even after he knew, somewhere deep down beneath all his excuses, that the parcels might come home again, he kept sending them. The young clerk would see him come in with a fresh jar of honeyed lemon, and her heart would clench, because she feared it would only come back. But she never once said a word to stop him. She understood, the way Walter understood, that the sending was the love, whether or not it was ever received. A father does what a father can. And so she would take his parcel and stamp it carefully, and wish him well and hope, the way the whole town quietly hoped, that this one might be the one that finally got through. Some of them perhaps did. Some of them simply vanished into the great indifferent city and were never heard of again, which is its own kind of mercy, because at least they did not come home wearing that cold yellow word, no recipient. And the building knew. That was the other thing. You cannot keep a secret in a place like that, where everyone lives so close that the walls themselves seem to whisper. And so slowly over the years the whole building came to understand what was happening to Emile's gifts. They saw the parcels leave full of hope and come home marked as returned. They knew about the dark space beneath the bed, though none of them had ever seen it. And do you know what those poor neighbors did? In that crumbling building with its peeling paint and its bad plumbing? They protected him. Quietly. Completely. Without one of them ever saying a word. When Emile told the tea stall that Daniel had loved the cradle, had wept over it, the barber and the motorbike man and all the rest, who knew perfectly well the cradle was at that very moment lying in the dark beneath the old man's bed, would nod and smile and say, "Of course he did, Emile, how could he not?" They never once let the truth cross their faces. They never pitied him out loud. They never pried his fingers loose from the story he was holding onto with both hands. They built a wall of gentle, knowing lies around their old friend's dignity, and they kept him safe inside it, and they let him go on being Daniel's beloved father, in his own heart, for as long as he needed to. That, my friends, is a kind of love we do not talk about enough. The love of a whole community deciding, together and without a word, to hold up the dignity of one of their own. The city had sent Emile's love home marked no recipient. But in that crumbling building, every single soul was a recipient of him, and not one of his gifts to them ever came back unopened. He had built their cribs and mended their roofs and watered their friendships for 30 years, and now, when he needed it most, they were quietly, fiercely returning all of it, in the only currency that mattered. They let him keep his hope. They let him keep his son. They let him keep himself. And now, my friends, I have to be fair to Daniel, because I have made him sound like a monster, and he was not one, and the truth is far more painful than any monster could ever be. Daniel was drowning. Up there in that great city, in that bigger life he had flown off to find, He was drowning the way that so very many people his age are drowning, in this very moment, and perhaps you know exactly the water I am describing. He had bought a flat because the bigger life demands a bigger flat, and that flat had come with a debt so enormous that it ate the better part of everything he earned, a mortgage that would hound him for 30 years to come. There was his wife, and then there was a child, and there were the schools, and the prices of that city that climb faster every year than any wage can ever follow. And then the company he worked for let him go just like that after all his years of loyalty, and he had to scramble to start something of his own, and a new business, my friends, is a mouth that is always hungry. His days became a solid wall of noise. Telephone calls from the bank. Telephone calls from the people he owed. Messages from clients who would leave him in a heartbeat if he so much as blinked. A young child who needed 100 things. A marriage straining and creaking under the whole crushing weight of it all. And every so often, in the very middle of all that noise, Daniel would think of his father. He would. I believe that completely, and so did Walter. He would be sitting at his desk late at night, or lying awake beside his sleeping wife, and the thought would rise up through the noise, clear and sudden. I should call Dad. And he would reach for the telephone. And then, in that very instant, the bank would ring. Or a client's message would light up the screen, or the baby would begin to cry in the next room, and the thought would slide away again, back down under the avalanche, and Daniel would tell himself the same small, comfortable lie that all of us tell ourselves. Next week. I will call him next week. He has got the old neighbors, the tea stall, all his friends down there. He is not alone. He is fine. I will go home and see him properly when the dust finally settles. There was one night in particular, Walter learned long afterward, that Daniel would never be able to forgive himself for, though it was the most ordinary night in the world, and that is exactly why it haunted him. It was late, well past midnight, and Daniel was sitting alone at his kitchen table in the city with a mountain of unpaid bills in front of him and the blue light of his phone on his tired face. And for no reason he could ever name, he had thought of his father with a sudden sharp ache, thought of the sound of the hand plane sliding along the wood, thought of the little carved bird on the high shelf gathering dust. And he had picked up his phone, and he had actually found his father's number, and he had actually pressed the call, and it had actually begun to ring. He held the phone to his ear in the dark, his heart suddenly pounding, rehearsing what he would say, how he would explain the silence, where he would even begin. 1 ring. 2 rings. And he could picture it so clearly, the old telephone on the wall of that little flat, his father shuffling toward it in the dark, his face lighting up. 3 rings. And then on Daniel's own table a second screen lit up, an email from a client, the big one, the one whose account was the only thing keeping the new business alive. And the subject line was a threat to leave. And Daniel, in a panic, took the phone from his ear and ended the call before his father could answer, and turned to the email instead, his hands shaking, telling himself he would call back in just a minute, just as soon as he had handled this one thing. And by the time the one thing was handled, it was nearly 2 in the morning, far too late to call an old man, and Daniel told himself, tomorrow. I will call him tomorrow. And tomorrow the noise began again, the way it always did, and the call slid down beneath the avalanche and was lost. 3 rings. His father had been 3 rings away. Walter often wondered whether Emile had heard the phone ring that night, had shuffled toward it in the dark and lifted it to find only the empty hum of a call already ended, and had told himself, the way he told himself everything, it was a wrong number or the boy got cut off. The lines up there are terrible. We will never know. But I want you to sit with that, my friends, because it is the truest and most terrible thing in this whole story. Daniel was not a monster. He was 3 rings away. He loved his father and he reached for him, and he was simply in that one fatal instant pulled away by the drowning, the way we are all pulled away every single day from the people we mean to call. The distance between Emile's lifted telephone and his son's ended call was not the distance of cruelty. It was the distance of next week. And next week, my friends, is wide enough to lose a whole father in. There was another night too, near the end, though Daniel did not know the end was near, when he had gotten as far as his car. He had had a terrible day, and he wanted suddenly and desperately to see his father, and he had gotten in the car and started the engine and driven nearly to the edge of the city, toward the road that led home. And then the phone had rung, a problem, an emergency, a thing only he could fix. And he had sat at the side of the road with the engine running and the road home stretching out ahead of him in the dark, and he had turned the car around. So close. He had been so close. He told Walter about that night later with his hands over his face, and he said the thing that I think is the lesson of the whole story, the thing he had paid for so dearly. I always thought there would be time, he said. I always thought he would just be there, that I could go whenever I finally got free. I never once understood that the door might close while I was busy. I thought love was something I could pick back up later. Nobody ever told me it could be taken away while my back was turned. But the dust never settles. That is the whole cruel trap of it, my friends. That is the quicksand that so many of us are caught in right now, this very night, even as someone who loves us sets a place at a table and waits. Daniel was not cruel. He was simply a man being slowly crushed beneath the impossible weight of staying afloat, and he made the oldest mistake there is, the one that is so easy to make that nearly all of us make it at one time or another. He assumed his father would always be there to call next week. He believed, without ever once stopping to truly examine the belief, that love was a thing you could set down for a while in a safe corner, and simply pick back up again later, right where you had left it, whenever you finally had the time. He did not know the terrible truth that his father knew in his bones, that some things you set down get quietly taken away while your back is turned, and that the corner you were so sure you left them in is empty when at last you come back to look. If you are feeling that particular squeeze right now, that ache in the gap between the people you love and the life that is busy eating you alive, I am not telling you any of this to make you feel worse, I promise you. I am telling you because there is still time for you tonight in a way that there very nearly was not for Daniel. So hold that thought too gently alongside the others. We are nearly to the turning of it now. Because Emile began to fail. Not all at once and not dramatically. Just the way the old strong trees go, slowly at first and then a little faster. His breath grew shorter on the stairs, so that he had to stop and rest at the landing, one hand on the wall he had helped to build. He would forget now and then whether he had eaten. The chess games at the tea stall grew slower, and not in the good and lingering way they once had. The motorbike man found himself driving the old carpenter to the clinic more and more often, and the people of that building who loved him watched it happening, and felt the particular helplessness of watching a great old tree begin, at last, to lean. And then one evening, sitting at the tea stall in the gold of the late light, with the chessboard between them under its faithful cloth, Emile said a thing to Walter very quietly, not at all like a complaint, but simply like a man stating a plain fact. Walter, he said, if anything should happen to me, the things under my bed, make sure that Daniel gets them. Finally. And he smiled when he said it, the way he always smiled, as though it were nothing at all. And Walter had to look away, out into the alley, because he knew exactly what was under that mattress, every returned and unopened token of 6 years of love, and he knew exactly what that single word finally truly meant, and he found that he simply could not bear it. So Walter did a thing that Emile never asked him to do, and never knew that he did. The tea stall woman, it turned out, had Daniel's telephone number, written down in an old and dog-eared book from years before. And Walter took that number, and he went off somewhere quiet by himself, and he called Emile's son. He did not accuse the boy. What good would that have done anyone? He simply told him the truth, plainly, one old man speaking to a younger one. Your father is failing, Walter said. He will not tell you so himself, because he never in his life wanted to be a trouble to you. But if you want to see him while he still knows your face, you should come. And you should come soon. I thought that somebody ought to tell you the truth of it. There was a long, long silence on the other end of the line. And then a voice came, tired and cracked, and somehow much older than Walter had expected it to sound, the voice of a man who was himself being slowly crushed by a weight no one could see. Thank you, the voice said. I will come. I will come this week. And for once, my friends, after 6 long years, it was not next week. It was this week. Daniel came on a gray afternoon, and the whole alley knew before he had even climbed out of the vehicle, because it was the kind of car that simply does not belong in a place like that. Long and black and gleaming, a city car, a successful car, easing slowly down a narrow lane where the only other traffic was bicycles and the motorbike man's endless repairs. Daniel stepped out of it in expensive clothes, and he stood there for a moment, looking up at that old, crumbling building the way a man looks at a country he used to live in long ago and has half forgotten. The motorbike man stopped his work and stood up slowly, a wrench still in his greasy hand. The tea stall woman went very still. And all of them, the whole small world of that building, simply watched in silence, as the boy they had heard about for 6 years, the boy from all of Emil's gentle excuses and shining lies, finally walked through the gate. Walter took him up to his father's door himself. He led the way up those worn stairs past the landing where Emil now had to stop and rest, and he knocked and then he stepped back. And I will not tell you everything that passed between them in that first moment, the old man and his son, because some things belong only to the two people standing in the room, and Walter was already quietly backing out the door, and pulling it closed behind him to leave them to it. But I will tell you what Daniel found because he told Walter later, with his hands still shaking, and Walter believed the boy would go on telling it to himself for the rest of his life. I said I would not tell you everything that passed in that first moment, and I will keep my word because some things are too sacred to put into words. But I will tell you this much. When the door opened and Emil saw his son standing there, real solid, finally there after 6 years of an empty chair, the old man did not say a word at first. He simply stood with one hand on the doorframe he had built, and he looked at the boy, and his whole face began to tremble, the way still water trembles when something deep beneath it finally rises. And then he reached out with both of those big scarred hands, and he took his son's face between them, the way you might cradle something impossibly precious that you had long ago given up hope of ever holding again, and he just held the boy's face and looked at it, as though he were trying to make up for 6 years of not seeing it in a single long gaze. And Daniel, who had rehearsed 1,000 explanations on the long drive down, who had a whole speech of apology ready, found that he could not say any of it. He could only stand there, with his father's worn hands on his face and break. Walter, backing quietly out the door, heard the old man say only one thing very softly, over and over, the way you soothe a child. You came. You came. There now. You came. And then Walter pulled the door gently shut and left them to it, and went and stood at the top of the stairs with his own face in his hands, because some doors you close not to shut a thing out, but to keep something wholly safely in. He found his father smaller than he remembered. So much smaller. Rising up slowly from a seat by the window, with a face full of a joy so total, so complete, so utterly without any anger or any blame, that the sight of it broke something open in Daniel right there where he stood. 6 years. 6 years of silence, of returned gifts, of a chair set every night for a son who never came. And the old man rose to greet that son with nothing in his face but pure and uncomplicated joy. The joy of a father who has waited his whole life for exactly this, and has finally got it. And beside that chair, Daniel saw a second one. Empty. With a place set at the table next to it, a clean bowl and a clean cup, a place that had so obviously been set, and cleared, and set again 10,000 quiet times across 6 long years of evenings. And then while Emil shuffled over to the little stove to heat some food for his boy, because of course he did, his son was here. After 6 years his son was finally here. And you have to feed your son. Daniel sat down on the edge of the old bed to steady himself. The bed frame his own father had built. And his hand, resting down at his side, brushed against something underneath the edge of the cloth that hung down to the floor. He felt it there in the dark beneath the bed. And slowly, not yet understanding, he lifted the cloth. And there it all was, hidden away in the dark. The cradle. The beautiful wooden cradle, with the little carved birds and the gentle crescent moon, that he had never received, never seen, never even known existed, sanded smooth and perfect over all those months by his father's patient hands, for a grandchild that Emil had only ever been allowed to dream of. And behind the cradle the jars. Rows upon rows of them. The honeyed lemon gone dark gold and crystallized with all the years it had waited there in the dark, each jar with a small slip of paper still stuck to its glass. And behind the jars the chess set, and the silent little music box, and the carved nameplate with his own family's name. Daniel pulled one of the jars out into the gray afternoon light with a trembling hand, and he read the slip stuck to it, and then he reached for another and read that one, and they all said the very same 4 words over and over and over, in the cold and indifferent language of the post office. Return to sender. No recipient. He reached deeper into the dark and drew out the little music box, the one with the small carved bird on its lid, and without quite thinking, the way your hands remember things your mind has forgotten, he wound the little key on the bottom, and the music box began to play, there in that silent room, a small and tinny and unbearably sweet little tune, and the carved bird turned slowly on its top, exactly as his father had built it to do years before, hoping a grandchild might one day watch it spin. It had never played for anyone. It had traveled to the city and back and then lain silent in the dark beneath a bed for years, its little song locked up inside it, waiting. And now it played at last, for the son it had been made for, in the very room where it had been carved, and Daniel sat on the floor and listened to that small brave tune fill the quiet, and it undid him completely. He drew out the carved chess set, the little army his father had shaped thinking of the games at the tea stall, and the nameplate with his own family's name on it, made for a door the family had already left behind. Each object was a day of his father's life. Each one was hours of those big careful hands, and a trip down the hill to the post office, and a hope sent out into the world, and a hope sent home again unopened. And his father had carried each one back up the stairs, and hidden it away, and lied so that no one would think badly of the boy who never came. Daniel did not say anything for a very long time. He sank down off the edge of the bed and onto the floor of that little room, his expensive coat pooling around him on the worn boards, and he held a single jar of his father's worry in his 2 hands, a jar that had traveled all the way to his grand metropolis and all the way home again without ever once reaching him, and he wept. He wept the way that grown men weep perhaps only once in their entire lives, silently, from somewhere very far down inside, with his whole body shaking. Because he understood, all at once, sitting on that floor, the thing that those cold little slips of paper were really saying. There had always been a recipient. There had always been a recipient. The recipient had simply been too busy drowning to ever come to the door. Every single jar beneath that bed was a day his father had thought of him, and worried for him, and reached out across all those miles to touch him, and been turned away and sent home. 6 full years of a father's love, returned unopened, and then carried gently up the stairs and hidden away in the dark beneath a mattress, so that no one, not even the dear old friend down the hall, would ever think a single hard thought about the boy who had not answered. His father had even protected him from his own neglect. His father had taken the evidence of his son's absence and hidden it, like something to be ashamed of, so that Daniel's name would stay clean in the building, so that no one would ever know. When Emil turned around from the little stove and saw what his son had uncovered, he did not get angry. He did not even look truly ashamed, though Walter thought afterward that perhaps a small part of him was ashamed to have been caught hoping, ashamed of his own returned and unwanted offerings, the way the poor are sometimes made to feel ashamed of their own love, as though there were too much of it, as though it were somehow improper to have loved so hard and so long and gotten nothing back. He simply set down the bowl he was holding, and he came across the room, slow on his bad knees, and he got down onto the floor beside his weeping son, and he reached into his pocket and drew out his handkerchief. And then, my friends, he did the thing that Walter said he could never tell without his own old eyes filling. He began to wipe his grown son's tears away. Gently, patiently, the way you would wipe the tears from the face of a small boy who had skinned his knee. As though no time at all had passed. As though the joint had never once come apart. As though all 6 of those long, silent, return-to-sender years had simply dissolved into nothing the moment his son finally walked back through the door. "Do not cry," Emil said softly, wiping his face. "Do not cry now. You are here. Look at you. You are here." And Daniel grabbed hold of his father's hands, those big, careful, scarred old carpenter's hands, and he pressed them hard against his own wet face, and he said the words he had been far too busy to say for 6 long years. "Dad, I am so sorry. I got everything wrong. Everything. I I have a big flat now, a good one, and there is a whole room in it for you, your own room with a window. Pack your things. Come home with me today. Right now, this very afternoon. Let me take care of you. Please. Please. Let me make it right. And here, my friends, is where the story does not go the way you think. Because Emil, kneeling there on the floor of his little room beside his weeping son, looked at Daniel for a long, long moment, and then gently, so gently, he shook his head. He did not say no in anger. He did not say it to punish the boy, or to make him feel the weight of 6 years all at once. He helped Daniel up off the floor, slow and careful, and he led him over to the window beside the 2 chairs, and he opened it, and the warm, living sounds of the alley came floating up to the 2 of them. And down below by the gate, Walter was standing at the tea stall, pretending not to watch, with the 2-year chess game still sitting right there on the table under its cloth, waiting. The tea stall woman was watering Emil's hallway plants, the ones she kept down by her stall when his knees were bad. The barber was setting out his stools for the afternoon. And the motorbike man called up something to the window, some joke, Walter never could remember what, and laughed his big laugh up into the gray light. Listen to me, Emil said to his son softly, looking down at all of it. That flat of yours. The room with the window. It is a beautiful thing and I love you for it, more than you will ever know. But I want you to truly understand what it would be, for me, at my age, to leave this place. To go and live somewhere where not one single person knows my name. To sit alone all day in a beautiful room behind clean glass, and wait for you to come home from your work, exactly the way you used to wait for me to finish mine when you were small. To have no one call up to my window. No game of chess to finish. No plants to water. No roof to climb up and mend for a friend. No one anywhere in that whole great building full of strangers who needs an old carpenter for anything at all. He shook his head slowly, his eyes still on the alley. That is not being cared for, son, he said. That is a beautiful punishment. You would be moving me somewhere lovely to be comfortable and to be finished. And I am not finished, Daniel. Not yet. And then he gestured down with one of his big scarred hands, at the whole of the alley below, at the tea stall and the chessboard and the plants and his old friends, his entire crumbling held-together world. I belong here, Emil said simply. These people know who I am. Down there, in this old falling-down building, I am still somebody. I am still Emil the joiner, the man who fixes your roof and builds your crib and finishes the chess game tomorrow. But up in your glass room in the sky, I would just be your old father waiting. I would just be the empty chair, except it would be me sitting in it. He turned at last and looked his son full in the face. I have already spent 6 years waiting, Daniel, he said, and there was no blame in it at all, only a deep and gentle truth. I have spent 6 years being the one who waits. I do not want to spend the few years I have left doing the very same thing, only in a nicer chair, behind a cleaner window, in a place where no one would ever think to knock on my door. Daniel could not answer. He stood at the window with the tears still wet on his face. And Walter said you could see the whole shape of his life rearranging itself behind his eyes. 6 years of assumptions coming quietly apart and being built again the right way this time. And then Emil did the thing that Walter said he would carry with him until they carried him out of that building feet first. He went back to the bed. He got down slow onto his bad knees and he reached underneath and he drew out the cradle. That beautiful cradle, dusty now, and dark with all the years it had spent waiting in the dark. He stood it up on the worn floorboards, and he took up the cloth, and with those careful, patient hands he wiped it down slow and tender, until the little carved birds came clean again, and the gentle crescent moon, until it looked once more exactly the way it had looked the day he finished it, all those years ago, full of nothing but hope. And then he pushed it gently across the floor to his son. This was never meant to live under a bed, Emil said quietly. It was meant for my grandchild. So you take it home with you. You put it in your beautiful flat. And the next time you come, and you will come now, I can see it in your face that you will come now, you bring that little one to meet me. Here. At this table. I have got a chair all ready and waiting. Daniel could not speak at all. He just nodded and nodded again, holding that cradle in his arms as though it might break, or as though he himself might. "Now," Emil said. And he turned back toward the little stove, and his voice changed entirely, got light, got ordinary, the warm and everyday voice of a father on the most ordinary and the most extraordinary evening of his whole life. "The food is getting cold," he said, "and you drove such a long way to get here. Sit down now and eat with your old father." And he pulled out the second chair. The empty place. The one that had waited 6 long years by that window, set and cleared and set again 10,000 times. He pulled it out from the little table, and he patted the back of it with one scarred hand. "Sit here," he said. "I saved it for you." And Daniel sat down at last, in the chair his father had saved for him. And for the first time in 6 years, after 10,000 lonely dinners eaten across from an empty place, both bowls at that small wooden table by the window were full. The fire was warm. The rice was hot. The bowl that had been kept waiting under the cloth all those years was finally set in front of the one it had always been meant for. And the two of them ate together, the old carpenter and his son, in the gold of the failing light, while down in the alley below, an old friend at a tea stall quietly wiped his eyes, and let them be. I would dearly love to tell you that Emil lived for many long years after that gray afternoon. But that would not be the truth, and I promised you at the very beginning that this was a true story. He had a little under 2 years left to him. But let me tell you how he spent them, my friends, and then you can decide for yourself whether this is a sad story or not, because I do not think it is, not really, not at the heart of it. Daniel came back. Not once, not twice, not just for show. He came back. Every couple of weeks at first, and then more often than that. He would drive that long black car down into the narrow alley and park it crooked and not care one bit that it did not belong there. And he would climb the worn stairs, past the landing, and he would sit down in the chair his father had saved for him, and he would eat at the little table by the window. And slowly, week by week, he learned the names. He learned the name of the tea stall woman, and he learned to call her by it, and to ask after her aching hip. He learned the barber's name, and let the old man trim his expensive city haircut for the price of a cup of tea, and pretended it was better than the salons up in the metropolis, and meant it. He learned the motorbike man's name, and shook his greasy hand, and listened to his endless complaints about the cost of parts. The boy who had flown so far away that he forgot how to land came back again and again, and learned to be a person in that building, a son in that alley, a thread in that web of 100 small and holding threads. And he even, God help him, took over his father's side of that endless 2-year chess game, near the very end, when Emil's eyes had grown too tired to follow the little carved pieces across the board. Walter said the boy played terribly, just terribly, far worse than his father ever had. But he played. He sat down on the wobbly plastic stool, in his fine city clothes, across from old Walter, and he moved the pieces his father had moved. And the two of them argued about something else entirely after 3 moves, and left the board sitting there under its cloth, exactly the way it was meant to be left, exactly the way Emil had always left it. The game went on. The promise of another tomorrow went on. The boy had come home, and he had picked up the thread right where his father set it down. There was one afternoon during those 2 years that Walter wished he could hand to every son and every daughter in the whole world. Daniel had come down on a quiet weekday, and instead of just sitting at the table, he had asked his father to show him the old tools again, the ones from the workshop days, and Emil's tired face had lit up like a boy's. He brought out the hand planes and the chisels, each one worn to the exact shape of his own grip over 50 years, and he showed his son how to hold them, the way he had when Daniel was small. And the two of them spent the whole golden afternoon together at the old workbench, the father guiding the son's soft city hands along a length of pale wood, and for those few hours the decades simply fell away. Daniel was 8 years old again, standing on the bottom rung, holding the wood steady, being told gravely that his father could not have done it without him. Except now the son's hands were the strong ones, and the father's were the ones that trembled, and there was something in that reversal so tender and so sorrowful that Walter, watching from the doorway, had to step back out into the hall. And it was during that afternoon that Daniel finally asked his father the question he had been carrying like a stone since the day he found the gifts beneath the bed. "Dad," he said, not looking up from the wood, "why were you never angry with me?" 6 years. I left you alone for 6 years. I didn't call. I didn't come. I let your gifts come back and I never even knew. How are you not angry? And Emil was quiet for a while, running his thumb along the grain of the wood the way he always did, feeling for the truth in it. And then he said, "You do not force the wood, son. I have told you that your whole life. You work with the grain it already has, not the grain you wish it had." He set down the plane. "You were not a cruel boy, Daniel. You were a drowning one. I knew that. I knew it the whole time. Anger is for when someone hurts you on purpose. You never hurt me on purpose. You just got swept away, the way the river sweeps a man away, and a father does not stand on the bank and shout at his drowning son for being in the water. He keeps the light on. He keeps the door open. He waits, and he hopes the current brings the boy back before it is too late." He looked at his son then with those soft, tired eyes. "If I had spent those 6 years being angry," he said, "then on the day you finally walked back through that door, my heart would have been a hard and bitter thing, a splintered piece of wood, and I could not have held you with it. I chose to keep my heart soft instead and ready so that when you came home, I would still have something good to welcome you with. The anger would have cost me this. And this, son, this afternoon your hands on my tools again, this is worth more than all the apologies in the world. I did not keep my heart soft for you. I kept it soft for me, so that I would not miss this when it finally came." Daniel had to put down the wood then, Walter said, because his hands were shaking too badly to hold it. And the two of them sat together at the old workbench in the fading light, the father and the son, and they did not say anything more, because there was nothing more that needed saying. The joint had come back together. No nails. No forcing. Just two pieces shaped by patience and by love, finally fitting the way they were always meant to fit. That was the gift Emil gave his son in those 2 short years, the gift that was greater even than the cradle. He gave him the chance to come home to a soft heart, and to be forgiven before he even finished asking, and to learn, while there was still just barely time, what a father's love truly is. It is not a thing that keeps a ledger. It is not a thing that holds a grudge. It is a thing that keeps the light on, and the door open and the heart soft through 6 years of silence and 10,000 lonely dinners, on the patient, stubborn, unbreakable faith that the boy will find his way home before the end. And the boy did. Just barely, by the thinnest mercy in the world, but he did. And then one day Daniel brought the baby. He brought Emil's granddaughter, a small girl they had named Juliet, to meet her grandfather at last, in that little one-room flat by the window. And the old carpenter took that child into his big, careful, scarred hands, the hands that had shaped half the doorways in that part of the city, and he held her the way he had once held a chisel and a length of fine wood, with all the patience and all the wonder and all the love in the whole of the world. He held her as though she were the finest thing he had ever made, and then he laid her down to sleep, for the very first time, in the cradle. The cradle he had carved before she was even so much as a hope. The cradle with the little birds and the gentle moon, that had spent all those years waiting in the dark beneath his bed, returned to sender, no recipient. He laid his granddaughter down into it, and she fit it perfectly. Of course she did, my friends. Of course she did. He had built it right. You do not force the wood. You shape it with patience and with love, true and careful, and you wait, and one day, even if it takes longer than your own heart can bear, the thing you made finds the one it was always meant to hold. The cradle had found its child at last. And the old man stood over it on his bad knees, and watched his granddaughter sleep in the gift that had come home to him unopened, and Walter said that in that moment Emil's face held a peace so complete that it was almost unbearable to look at. The empty place had been filled. The returned love had finally been received. The joint had come back together, true and whole, with no nails and no forcing, just as the old joiner had always believed, in his patient and unbreakable heart, that it one day would. And those last months held a kind of grace that Walter said he had never witnessed before or since, because Emil, in the time he had left, got to be a grandfather fully and completely the way he had once been a father. When little Juliet began to learn to walk, Emil built her a low railing along one wall of his flat, smooth and round and just the right height for a small hand to hold, exactly the way he had built one for Daniel 40 years before. And Daniel, watching his daughter toddle along that railing in the same flat where he had once taken his own first steps, holding the same kind of railing made by the same hands, had to step out into the hall, because some circles when they close are almost too much for the heart to hold. Emil carved the baby a little wooden bird too, the same as the one he had made for Daniel on the day the other boys had teased him, a rough scrap of wood patiently shaped until it seemed almost about to fly. And he told his son, "You keep this one safe for her, until she is old enough to be told what it means." And Daniel set it on a shelf in the city, beside the dusty bird from his own childhood, two little wooden birds from the same patient hands, 2 generations of the same quiet lesson. Nothing is worthless. Nothing is beyond saving. Everything thrown away has something beautiful inside it, waiting for someone patient enough to bring it out. There was an afternoon, near the very end, that Walter carries with him still. All 3 of them were there, the old man, the son, and the baby, in that little one-room flat by the window. Emil sat in his chair, too tired now to do much, with Juliet asleep against his chest. And Daniel sat across the little table in the chair that had once been empty, the chair his father had saved for 6 years, and the 2 men played a few slow moves of chess on a board between them, and nobody spoke and nobody needed to. The fire was warm. The rice was on. A bowl was kept warm under its cloth, the way it always had been, except now there was no longer any empty place at that table, because every chair was full at last. And Walter, who had come up to bring them some bread, stood in the doorway and looked at the 3 of them, 3 generations gathered around a table that had waited so long to be full, and he thought his old heart might simply break with the bittersweet fullness of it. He did not go in. He just set the bread down quietly on the step and went back down to the tea stall, and let them have the afternoon, because some kinds of joy are too tender to interrupt, and because he knew the way you know these things, that there would not be very many more of them. That was the harvest, my friends. That was the fruit of the tree the old man had planted into the dark so many years before, carved into the shape of a cradle, sent away and returned and hidden and finally received. He had planted it in faith, never knowing if he would live to taste it. And he lived just long enough. He held his granddaughter in the hands that built her cradle. He sat across a full table from the son he had waited 6 years to welcome home. He got to be, for 2 short and shining years, exactly the grandfather and the father he had always longed to be, in exactly the place where he belonged, surrounded by exactly the people who knew his name. It was not the long life he deserved. But it was, in those last 2 years, a full one. The pot had been kept on the fire all those lonely years, and it had not gone cold, and in the end there was a warm meal at the table for everyone he loved. That is not a sad ending, my friends. That is the whole reason he never let the fire die. Emil passed away in his sleep in his own bed, the bed he had built with his own hands, in the little room where he had loved his son and waited for his son and welcomed his son home at last. His granddaughter's small blanket was folded on the chair beside him. He went gently, the way a good fire goes down to embers at the end of a long warm evening, with nothing left undone and nothing left unsaid. And the whole alley came to say goodbye to him. Every single one of them. The barber and the motorbike man and Walter, and all the families up and down that crumbling old building whose doors and tables and window frames had been shaped by Emil's careful hands across half a lifetime. And the tea stall woman, who had kept his plants watered and his unfinished chess game safe under its cloth for 2 long years, closed her little business for the whole of that day, to mourn him. And I am told, my friends, that she had not closed that stall for a single day in 30 years. Not for storms, not for sickness, not for anything. But she closed it for Emil. That is what it is to have lived a life that mattered to the people around you. That is what it is to have been somebody, in the place where you belonged. The whole building grieved him the way you grieve a part of the house itself, a load-bearing wall, a thing you did not realize was holding up the roof until it was gone. People came to the little flat for days afterward. The ones whose cribs he had built and whose roofs he had mended and whose troubles he had quietly carried. And they stood in that small room where the empty chair had waited for 6 years, and they did not know what to do with their hands. The barber could not speak at all. The motorbike man, who had driven Emil to the clinic so many times, sat on the stairs outside for a long while by himself. And Walter, dear old Walter, did the last thing his friend had ever asked of him. He took Daniel aside, and he told him what Emile had said at the tea stall near the end. If anything happens to me, the things under my bed, make sure Daniel gets them. Finally. And the two men got down together, slow on their old knees, and they drew out everything that was left in the dark beneath the bed, all the returned love of 6 long years, and they gave it, at last, to the one it had always been meant for. Daniel knelt on the floor of his father's flat and received, finally, every gift his father had ever sent him. The jars and the chess set and the silent little music box and the carved nameplate with his own family's name. Finally. The word his father had used. The word that meant his father had known all along, that the day would come when his boy would receive his love at last, even if the old man himself was no longer there to see it land. He had been right. He was always right about the wood, and about the grain, and about the patient holding of a true joint. The love came home in the end. It only took longer than a heart could bear. They buried him with his granddaughter's blanket, the small soft thing that had been folded on the chair beside him when he passed. And little Juliet, too young to understand, was there in her father's arms. And at one point in that long sad day she reached out her small hand toward the wooden box her grandfather lay in. The box made by the same kind of careful hands that had made her cradle. And Daniel let her touch it, and said softly, "That is your grandfather, my love. He made beautiful things. He made the bed you sleep in. And he waited a very long time for you." The whole alley heard it, and the whole alley wept. And the tea stall woman, who had kept Emile's plants watered and his chess game safe and his dignity whole for so many years, closed her little stall for the day, the only day in 30 years, and she sat in the empty place by the gate where the old men used to gather, and she looked up at his window, and she said goodbye to her friend. And Daniel grieved like a man who knew, deep in his bones, that he had been given just exactly enough time to save his own soul, and not one single day more. He understood, standing at his father's graveside, how very close he had come to losing it all to next week. He understood that if Walter had not made that one quiet telephone call, he would have come home one day to an empty flat and a cloth-covered bed and a whole life's worth of returned and unopened love, and he would have had to live the rest of his days knowing that the recipient had been too busy drowning to ever come to the door, and that there was no longer any door to come to. He had been spared that, by the thinnest of margins, by the kindness of an old neighbor and the patience of an old father. And he did not waste what he had been spared. He took the cradle home, of course, to his beautiful flat in the city, and his daughter Juliet slept in it, and grew in it, the gift that had finally found its child. But Daniel did one other thing too, a thing that Walter only learned about much later, and that I think is the truest sign of all that the boy had finally understood. In Daniel's grand flat up in the metropolis at his own table, he began to set an extra place. Not for a ghost and not out of guilt. He set it for whoever might come, for his neighbors, for a friend, for a lonely soul, for his own growing daughter, the way his father had once kept a bowl warm under a cloth. And he taught his daughter as she grew, the thing it had cost him so very dearly to learn. He would take little Juliet on his knee, and he would tell her about her grandfather, the great carpenter, the man with the careful hands who built the very cradle she had slept in. And he would tell her, "You do not put love down in a corner, my darling, and expect to find it waiting there when you finally have the time. You have to show up for it. Every single day." He had learned it too late to give his father more than 2 years. But he had learned it in time to give it to his daughter for the whole of her life. And here is the thing that told Walter more than anything that the boy had truly understood. Daniel did not stop coming to the alley after his father died. You might have thought he would. There was no longer any reason to make the long drive down into that narrow lane. No father waiting in the window, no chair to fill. The successful man could have driven away from that crumbling old building and never looked back, and folded the whole sad chapter away. But he did not. He kept coming. He would drive that long black car down into the alley every few weeks still, and park it crooked, and climb the worn stairs not to his father's flat now but down to the tea stall, and sit on the wobbly plastic stool, and drink the tea that was brewed too strong. And he finished the chess game. The endless 2-year game his father had left unfinished with Walter, the one the tea stall woman had kept safe under its cloth for so long. Daniel sat down across from old Walter in his father's place, and the two of them played it out slowly over many visits, until at last, one quiet golden evening, the game was done. And when it was done, Walter said, the boy sat looking at the finished board for a long time, and then he said, my father would never finish this game. He always wanted there to be one more tomorrow. And Walter had said, yes. That was your father exactly. And the two men had sat in the gold light, and missed him together, which is its own kind of comfort. Daniel learned the neighbors and kept learning them, and they became in time something like his own. He brought Juliet down to that building as she grew, so that she would know the place her grandfather had loved, so that she would grow up knowing the tea stall woman and the barber and the motorbike man, so that the threads that had held Emile would hold her too. And he told them stories of his father, the ones they already knew and the ones they did not, and in the telling Emile stayed alive among them, the way the good dead stay alive, in the mouths of the people who loved them. The successful man from the city, who had once been too busy drowning to make a single phone call, became a fixture in that crumbling alley, a keeper of his father's memory, a thread in the very web he had once flown so far away from. He cut back his work, too, in the end. He had learned at a terrible price what the noise of a life can cost you, and he refused to pay it twice. He let some clients go. He let some ambitions go. And he was there every single evening for his own daughter. In a way, his drowning had nearly stopped him from being for anyone, because he had finally learned the one lesson his father's whole life had been trying to teach him, and he was not going to waste it. The thread that Emile had held so patiently, alone in the dark for 6 long years, did not break when the old man died. It passed instead into his son's hands, and from his son's hands it would pass in time into his granddaughter's and on and on. That is how love survives, my friends. Not by never being dropped, but by being picked back up at last by someone who finally understands what it is worth. And so here was old Walter, sitting alone at the tea stall in the evenings, after it was all over. The endless 2-year chess game was finally sadly finished, packed away at last into its little box, because there was no one left to leave it unfinished with. There is a new old man sitting on Emile's wobbly plastic stool now, drinking tea that is brewed too strong, the way there is always a new old man in every alley, in every building, in every corner of this turning world. Life keeps moving. The great city up there keeps grinding on. But Walter told me that every single evening, when the sun goes down and the lights begin to come on in the windows of that old crumbling building, he looks up at one particular window, Emile's window. And he does not see an old carpenter there anymore. He sees instead a reminder of the one thing that whole long story had to teach him, the thing he said he had needed to tell to someone for so very long. That love is not something you set down in a quiet corner and expect to find waiting there, patient and unchanged, for the day you finally have the time to come back for it. Love is something you have to show up for. Every single day. The whole time it is on the fire. I am Walter, the old man said to me at the end of it. Thank you for sitting with me all the way through to the end. The night is still young yet. And if there is a light on in a window somewhere waiting for you, then do not wait for next week. Go now. Go and knock on the door. And that, my friends, is where I will let Emile's story come to rest. But before I take you back to my own warm kitchen one last time, I want to sit with you a moment longer, and gather up the gentle lessons of it, because I think this is a story that has a great deal to teach those of us who are still lucky enough to have time. The first lesson is the one my cooking pot taught us at the very beginning. Love is not a thing you can set on the fire and then walk away from. It is not a pot you can leave in the corner of your life and expect to find still warm, still whole, still waiting, on the distant day when you finally believe you have the time to come back to it. Love must be tended, fed, stirred, shown up for. Not once a year on a birthday, not when the dust finally settles, because the dust never settles, my friends, not for anyone, not ever. Love must be shown up for a little every single day, the whole time it is on the fire. Daniel set his father down in a corner and turned his back to deal with the noise of his life, and he was not a cruel man. He was only a drowning one, But when he finally turned back around, his father's pot had been sitting alone on the coals for 6 long years, and it was only by the thinnest mercy in the world that there were still a few warm embers left, and not just cold gray ash. And so I beg you, do not trust next week. Next week is the great quiet thief of all the love in this world. It does not announce itself. It does not slam any doors. It simply whispers, you are busy now, you will call when things calm down, they will surely understand, they will always be there. And the tide goes out so slowly that you never see the water leaving. Until one terrible afternoon you look up and there is nothing but dry sand all the way to the horizon. And the one who set a place for you every night has set down their love at last, and there is no longer any door left to knock upon. The people who love you are not promised to you forever. The light in that window will not burn forever. Go now. Make the call this week, not next week. Knock on the door tonight, while there is still someone behind it, waiting, who will weep with joy just to see your face. And I want to speak for a moment to those of you on the other side of this story, because some of you listening tonight are not the busy ones who drifted away. Some of you are Emil. Some of you are the one who sets the place at the table, who keeps the light on, who waits and waits for a child or a grandchild who is always too busy, always next week, always swept up in a life that has carried them somewhere you cannot follow. And to you, my dear ones, I want to say 2 things. First, do not let your heart go hard. I know how it aches. I know the cost of keeping that chair set night after night for someone who does not come. But Emil was right. Keep your heart soft and your door open, not for their sake but for your own, so that when they finally come home, and so many of them do come home in the end, you will still have something warm and whole to welcome them with. And second, this, even while you wait, do not forget that you are surrounded, very likely, by a whole world of people who do come to your door. The neighbors, the old friends, the small daily faces of your life. Emil waited 6 years for one son, and that waiting was real and it mattered. But he was also held every single day by 100 quiet threads of people who knew his name and needed his hands and loved him fiercely. Do not let the one empty chair blind you to the full table all around you. The love that does not come back is real. But so is the love that is right there every day, if you will only turn your eyes from the window long enough to see it. But there is a second lesson here, and it is gentler and quieter, and I do not want you to miss it because Emil gave it to us with his refusal, and it surprised everyone. When Daniel offered to take his father up to the beautiful room with the window, he was offering love, real love, the very best he had. And Emil, in his wisdom, knew the difference between being loved and being put away comfortably to be finished. He knew that a person does not stop needing to belong, to be known, to be needed, to be somebody, simply because they have grown old. He knew that to be moved from a crumbling building where 100 threads held him, to a gleaming tower where no one knew his name, would not be a rescue at all, but a beautiful punishment. So if you love an old person in your life, hear what Emil was trying to say. Do not only ask how you can make them comfortable, ask how you can keep them belonging. Ask how you can keep them needed and known and somebody for as long as you possibly can. Because a warm chair in a lonely room is a far colder thing than a hard stool at a tea stall full of friends who call your name. There is a lesson here too about forgiveness, and it is one of the hardest and most beautiful in the whole story, so I want to hold it up to the light for you. Emil forgave his son before the boy had even finished asking. He did not make Daniel earn it. He did not make him grovel or explain, or pay for the 6 lost years with 6 years of penance. He wiped his weeping son's tears with his own handkerchief and said only, "You are here now, look at you, you are here." And when Daniel later asked him how he could possibly not be angry, Emil told him the truest thing about forgiveness I have ever heard. He said he had kept his heart soft on purpose, all those years, not for Daniel's sake but for his own. Because he knew that if he let the anger in, if he let his heart go hard and splintered and bitter, then on the day his son finally came home, he would have had nothing good left to welcome him with. The anger would have cost him the reunion. It would have cost him those last 2 shining years. And so he chose every single day of those 6 lonely years to keep his heart soft and open and ready, like a door left unlocked, so that whenever the boy came home, the welcome would still be there, whole and warm and waiting. I want you to think about that, my friends, because so many of us are carrying a hard, splintered place in our hearts toward someone who wronged us, someone who drifted, someone who was not there when we needed them. And we think the hardness protects us. We think it is justice. But Emil understood that a hard heart does not punish the one who hurt you. It only punishes you by making sure that even if they come back, even if they are sorry, even if the joint could fit together again, your heart has gone too splintered to hold them. Forgiveness is not saying that what happened did not hurt. Emil's 6 years of returned love hurt more than I can tell you. Forgiveness is choosing to keep your own heart soft enough that, if the day ever comes, you will still be able to welcome home the one you love. It is a gift you give yourself as much as them. Emil gave himself that gift, and it bought him the most precious thing in his whole life. It bought him a full table at the very end when it mattered most. And if there is someone you have been keeping a hard place in your heart for, someone who was drowning when they failed you, I hope you will think of an old carpenter who chose to stay soft, and ask yourself what your hardness is truly costing you, and whether you might lay it down, before the day comes when you wish you had, and find that your heart has gone too splintered to hold the very thing you longed for most. And the last lesson is the one the cradle taught us, the one about love that plants for those who come after. Emil carved a cradle for a grandchild who was not yet born, and it came back to him unopened, and he hid it in the dark, and still in the end it found its child. Some of the love you give in this life will come back to you marked return to sender, no recipient. You will pour your whole heart into something for someone, and it will seem to come to nothing, and you will be tempted to believe it was wasted. It was not wasted, my friends. Love is never wasted. It only waits sometimes in the dark longer than your heart can bear, for the day it finally finds the one it was always meant to hold. Keep loving anyway. Keep tending the pot. Keep the bowl warm. Keep planting the trees whose shade you may never sit in. Because here is the secret that the old carpenter knew. The secret hidden inside that returned and unopened cradle. Love is not measured by whether it is received. It is measured only by whether it is given. Every jar of honeyed lemon Emil sent into the cold was an act of love, whole and complete in the very moment he sealed it, whether or not it ever reached the city, whether or not it ever came home again. The love was in the making and the sending and the hoping. The receiving was always only the part the world could see. So if you are pouring your heart into someone who does not yet know how to receive it, a distant child, a hardened friend, a person who sends back everything you give, do not believe for one moment that your love is wasted. It is not lost. It is only planted in the dark, waiting. And love planted in good faith does not rot in the ground. It waits however long it must, for the season it was always meant for. Emil's love waited 6 years in the dark beneath a bed, and then it rose all at once and bore fruit he lived just long enough to taste. Yours may take longer, or it may rise tomorrow, but it will rise. Give it anyway. Plant it in faith and let the seasons do the rest. Because love does not survive in this world by never being dropped. It survives by being picked back up at last by someone who finally understands what it is worth. Daniel picked it back up. And he handed it, in the end, to his daughter. And so the old carpenter's patient, waiting return to sender love did not die in the dark beneath a bed. It is out there still, being carried forward, by a little girl who slept in a cradle her grandfather carved before she was ever even a hope. So now let me carry you back one last time to my own warm kitchen, where the pot has been simmering on the fire this whole long while, tended, the way a pot must be. Do you remember what I told you at the very start of all this? That you cannot set a pot on the fire and walk away and expect it warm and whole when you come back. That love is a thing you must show up for every single day. Emil understood that better than almost anyone I have ever heard of. For 6 years all alone, with nothing coming back to him but cold yellow stickers and unopened jars, he tended the pot. He kept the fire. He never once let it go cold. And do you remember the warm bowl I keep under a clean cloth at the edge of my hearth, set aside just in case? That was Emil's empty chair. That was the place he kept set every night for 6 years. The light he left burning in the window. The love that simply would not stop saving someone a seat at the table. And do you remember the young fruit tree I planted this morning, knowing I may never taste its fruit? That was Emil's cradle, carved with patient hands for a child not yet born, planted into the dark in faith, for a harvest he might never live to gather. He gathered it in the end. He held her in his arms, and he laid her down to sleep in the gift that had come home. The tree bore fruit, and the old gardener lived just long enough to taste it. So let me ask you before you go tonight, and I do read every answer, so please tell me gently and honestly. Is there someone in your life who has kept a bowl warm for you? Who has left a light on in a window? Who has saved you a seat at their table for far too long while you were busy out there, drowning in the noise of your own life? Will you go to them this week and not next week? And tell me this too, because I am truly curious which way your own heart leans. If it were you, would you have flown off to the great city like Daniel, and learned only how to fly and never how to land? Or would you have stayed like Emil, in the small and crumbling place where people knew your name? There is no wrong answer. I only want to know what is in your heart. Tell me down in the comments, and tell me the name of the place you are listening from tonight, because it fills this old heart of mine to know how far we have all traveled together, gathered around these stories from every corner of the world. If this one reached you, if it made you think of a light on in a window somewhere, then do an old cook a kindness and leave a like so that someone else who needs to hear it, someone who still has time, can find their way to it too. Subscribe and stay close, because there is always another pot on the fire here, and always a bowl kept warm for you under the cloth. Take gentle care of yourselves, my friends. Tend the pot. Keep the bowl warm. And if there is a light on in a window somewhere waiting for you tonight, please do not wait for next week. Go now. Go and knock on the door. And I will see you on the next one.